Hey there, and welcome back to another edition of our series together with Arjan Robbins of How to Manage a Small Law Firm. In this particular segment, we're going to talk about scaling. What does it mean to scale? Some of the frameworks involved, and maybe some of the elements that I wish that I knew, maybe elements that Arjan wished that he knew sooner in order to help you take your practice to the next level, whatever that means for you individually. So I'd say the first thing, diving into it, Arjan, would be, what is the difference between growth and scale?
Right. So growing a law firm is linear. There is a direct correlation between inputs and outputs. Most lawyers who think that having a $1 million law firm is twice as hard as having a $500,000 law firm, they're thinking about growth. They're thinking that one unit of input is required to produce $100,000 of revenue. So 2 units of input must be required to produce $200,000 of revenue. So 3 units of input must be required to produce $300,000 of revenue. And holy crap, I'm already burning the candle at both ends, giving it 3 or 4 units of input and having $300,000 or $400,000 of gross revenue. I can't give it 10 units of input. I can't give it 20 units of input. I can't give it 50 units of input. How could I ever have a $2 million, $5 million law firm? Because they're thinking growth. Scale happens when you decouple the input and the output. It happens, a very simplified way of saying is you achieve certain economies of scale, but that's kind of like using the definition in the definition of the definition.
Circular definition.
It's the circular definition.
Yeah.
So it's where you decouple the inputs from the outputs. You begin to get a disproportionate amount of output for every unit of input. So in simple terms, you reach a point with most small law firms around $1.5 million in gross revenue, which, I mean, I can give examples for 200,000, 500,000, but in this particular example, around $1.5 million in gross revenue is when it really makes sense to bring in a professional, full-time professional legal administrator, right? This person's typically gonna be earning $150,000 a year and up, right? Well, once you put a full-time professional legal administrator into a $1.5 million law firm, the law firm goes from $1.5 million to $3 million, like so fast you can't even believe it. And it becomes half as hard or twice as easy for the owner in every respect, right? Because until you have that full-time professional legal administrator, the owner of the firm, who's never studied marketing, who's never studied sales, who's never studied management, who's never studied financial controls, who's never been formally trained in the business of how to manage a law firm, who, you know, that person who's never been trained, it takes a lot more effort for that person to produce 1 unit of output because they don't know what they're doing, because they don't teach us these things in law school.
Yep.
Number 2, the owner of the law firm is only wearing the professional legal administrator hat. Think about it. How many hours a day, or how many hours a week, or how many hours a month? It's a part-time gig, right? So it's a part-time gig being done by someone who doesn't really like doing it, and they're not good at it either because they never formally studied it. Well, imagine what happens when a law firm goes from having a part-time person who doesn't know what they're doing and doesn't like doing it, attending to the management of the business, and all of a sudden a full-time person steps in 45, 50 hours a week, and they're properly professionally trained on how to do the job, and they actually like it. And the results just become it's just a quantum leap in growth, right? That's an example of decoupling inputs from outputs. as the business grows, right? So you get the business to $1.5 million, you put this professional legal administrator in place, and when the firm gets to $3 million, you don't need a second professional legal administrator. When the firm gets to $5 million, you don't need a third professional legal administrator.
Because they can delegate.
Well, because one professional legal administrator can run a $25 million law firm. One really good professional legal administrator can run a $50 million law firm. If you get the professional legal administrator at $1.5 million who has run a $5 or $10 or $20 million law firm, you don't need to replace that person until you get to that next milestone, right? And this is another example of what I mean by decoupling inputs from outputs. So the $150,000 a year professional legal administrator running the $1.5 million law firm, that's 10% of gross revenue going to pay the professional legal administrator, right? But now that person takes the firm to $3 million, maybe their income goes to $200,000. Now they take the firm to $5 million, maybe their income goes to $250,000. Are you seeing where I'm going with this?
Yep.
So you have a disproportionate growth in revenue relative to costs and other inputs of time, energy, labor, capital, and things like that. That's the difference between growth and scale. Unfortunately, most law firm owners, they never break through to that point where they can really achieve scale. And so they live their lives stuck in growth mindset instead of scale mindset.
So I think that from experience, most of the law firms that we've worked with have been in that growth mindset. I did 100, and then I did 150, and then I did 200, and then I did 225, and then I did 225, and then I did 225, and then I did maybe 300. And it's not, I mean, you could say it's linear, because there's an element of that maybe that's perhaps linear.
It's very linear.
That, well, as far as the plateau at least, of several years with the same exact income year after year. And then maybe
the average small law firm in this country grows at 5% per year. The average AmLaw 200 law firm, these are the 200 largest law firms in the country, almost the world, they grow at an average of about 2% per year. Our members, we manage 650 law firms. I mean, if a law firm isn't growing 25, 30% per year, like, we're looking under the hood to see what's wrong, right? If the owner of the firm isn't working less and less as the firm grows more and more, something has gone horribly wrong. The fact of the matter is, most lawyers, they never get to the point where they can actually achieve scale. And so it becomes just like this great unknown to them.
It's a matter of, like, they're still stuck in the business, not on the business, which is, maybe beaten, dead, like beating a horse to death. But it's so true in so many capacities, and just working in it, and they're stuck in that linear growth.
I'll give you another example. I mean, we could use a stick shift car, or you're a bicyclist. What's the highest gear? Do you have a 10-speed, or am I embarrassing myself thinking you have a 10-speed?
Well,
yes,
yeah.
It's a Huffy.
No, like 11, 12 as far as the back.
The point I'm making is, so I'll use a stick shift car because I think most people can relate to that.
Yeah.
Okay. You're in first gear in a stick shift car, and you're going, let's say, 20 miles an hour, and you're revving the engine at, let's say, 3,000 RPMs. And now you want to go to 40 miles an hour, so you got to rev the engine to 4,000 RPMs. And then you want to go to 50 miles an hour, and then you got to go to 5,000 RPMs. And the whole thing's like shaking apart, and there's smoke coming out, and it's like, right? Well, there's second gear, right? Because you go to second gear, and now you can drop back down to 2,000 RPMs and go 50 miles an hour. And then you can go to third gear, right? Scale is like literally changing the gear ratios in the firm, where it gets easier and more efficient to go faster and faster with less and less input.
And I think that that's something that's overlooked. And we talk about this in a variety of our other editions that we've done together of whether it's scale or growth or taking time out of the business or a lifestyle practice, whatever the thing is having the right people around you, the right team to do some of these things. I think the element that is also that I've run into in my businesses has been that I think a lot of attorneys can relate to is for way too long, I was working in the business and not on the business.
Right.
Because especially early on, I was like, well, I could just do that myself. Well, I could just do that myself. I could take that on myself. But you're not really realizing is how much faster you could grow or scale by having the right butts in the right seats at the right time, doing the right thing. But taking that a step further, how truly inexpensive it is. So you sort of alluded to maybe you're paying them 150 grand a year, but if you went from $1.5 million to 3 million, what is the real cost of that? Because you would never done that on your own.
And that's just measuring the financial part of it. The peace of mind, the confidence the confidence from knowing that you can step away from the firm for 30 days with emergency access only, and there's a real grown-up, trained professional in place keeping the thing running. You came in this morning, I hadn't been in this office in about a month and a half, right? I only work in how to manage a small law firm about 90 days per year. That's it.
Yep.
Right? I've got this amazing team who I put in place who use the processes, use the systems, use the procedures that I built to keep the things running. And that's part of scale, because while they're busy keeping the day-to-day operations going, I can be innovating, I can be experimenting, I can be exploring, I can be discovering, I can be testing and failing. I have a personal little Arjan slush fund. Every year, we start off with $250,000 that we put aside for me to just experiment with. And sometimes at the end of the year, we're like, that was a big waste. I mean, it's not a waste because you learn, you grow.
Yeah.
Like Edison said, I didn't fail 10,000 times. I found 10,000 ways not to invent a light bulb.
Yep.
Anyway, the point I'm making is, but if I didn't have the freedom of time more than the money, if I didn't have the freedom of time, first of all, we wouldn't be able to do this.
Yep.
Right? And who knows what this will lead to. This could lead to all kinds of amazing things. And I'm not even trying to be altruistic about, you're going to help all of the lawyers out there, which is great. And that matters to me, and it matters to you, and it matters to the whole Daniel's head team and my team too. But just strictly selfishly speaking, this could lead to something really interesting in the future. And a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, if this leads to that thing that I couldn't have anticipated when we started, it will be because I had given myself the freedom through scaling the business to then take that next quantum leap and stumble, bumble, fumble my way into it. Which, by the way, I'm looking directly at the camera. Anyone who has a multi-million-dollar business, a multi-million-dollar law firm, who tells you that they executed the plan from 0 to $5 million like a straight line, they're a liar. That's just not true. It doesn't happen that way, right? You zig, you zag, you take 2 steps forward, 1 step back. If you're lucky, sometimes it's 2 steps forward and 5 steps back.
Yep.
3 to the left, 1 to the right, jump over something and crawl through a hole and look at what I discovered, right? I mean, but you got to have the freedom to do that.
Yep.
And that's one of the great joys of having a business that's scaling up.
And I think in that vein, one of the things, the group that we originally met in, high-level mastermind group, one of the things I said years ago is if you don't enjoy the task that you're doing and you can pay someone else to do it, then it frees up a considerable amount of your time. And it's one of those things where I think that you can hear it and you can process it and be like, that sounds like a great idea. But there's all of these maybe limiting beliefs or stories that we tell ourselves. So for me, it was, I hate I like cooking when it's on my terms. I hate doing laundry. I hate doing like admin task work. But I was like, it didn't make sense to hire someone else to go do those things. It was the story that I told myself because I can just do it myself. But it's $15 or $20 an hour work. But when you stack all of these little things up over the course of a day, over the course of a week, over the course of a month, over the course of a year, how much time do you buy back?
It's so much more expensive even than what you're saying. You're only calculating it one-dimensionally.
Yes, I'm trying to make it as simple as possible.
But there's another dimension to it that the problem with the way you're describing it, and I'm not arguing with you, I agree with everything you just said, but the problem with the way you're describing it is that all of the law firm owners who haven't yet experienced the reality of what you're talking about, they're going to try to calculate it on that same one dimension. And the math isn't going to work in the beginning.
It doesn't.
It doesn't work in the beginning, right? Because the part of it that you're not talking about, which I would love for you to talk about.
I'll get there.
Okay, I'm going to get you to talk about it, is you thought you were interviewing me. No, this is a conversation. It's not just a matter of the time or the value of the time or the cost of the time. That's that one dimension, that flat one dimension that I was talking about. When you are doing something you don't like doing, you are in a different energetic state.
100%. That's the way I was going. The certain things that I was mentioning, like I hate admin work, I hate cooking, I hate doing laundry. Knowing that I had to do those things that day, or had to cross that off the list later today, it put me in a different space psychologically of like, this is looming out there that I have to go do it. So my attention is not laser focused on the thing that I needed to do the most important thing that would move the needle.
And when you're doing things you don't like doing, your mind contracts, not in a good way.
Yep.
Right? When you're doing something that feeds your soul, when you're doing something you like doing, when you're doing something you're in the zone. I have vivid recollections. I have vivid memories of being on stage, conducting a workshop where I'm just like having so much fun and I'm connecting with the audience and it's just a subject matter that I really am enthusiastic about. And I literally will have an out-of-body experience. And my body is there on the stage doing what I'm doing. And my consciousness is like above it, watching it, editing the talk while I'm doing the talk, and seeing connections. I've never done drugs, but I imagine that if I was someone who took acid, this must be what it's like. I mean, this is it's like you're making connections, right? But that kind of brilliance, that kind of connection with the higher power, that kind of connection, it doesn't happen when you're doing things you hate doing.
Yep.
And so you deny yourself all of these massive competitive advantages. And this is something you can't put on a spreadsheet. And this is why lawyers who have never experienced it, who keep trying to quantify it just in terms of billable hours, it doesn't add up.
No.
It won't add up that way.
I think that the easiest place that I started was that one-dimensional, like, can I do this? Did it make financial sense? But you're exactly right. Like, then you expand out, the other layers of the onion. And you're like, What about this and what about that, and so on and so forth. And you and I both had the topic, or mentioned, before. One of the most valuable people in our lives, other than our immediate family, spouse, children, etc., is the nanny taking care of the children. One of the
most profitable person on my payroll is DHIA Studia's, we call her his executive assistant.
It's so true. And I tell you, when I made that jump from thinking like dollar per task or dollar per hour for thing to the next level of things, eliminating the baggage mentally that I was carrying around of like, oh, I don't want to do this thing. And then you delay it and all of the things that build up. And then making the investments in the things that would actually buy me back time in ways that I did not necessarily, I knew it would probably help, but I didn't understand to the full capacity. Game changer. That's when we really started scaling.
Yeah.
Because I could eliminate and know that certain elements of my personal life, certain elements of the admin or the business were taken care of, to allow me to then make that shift from being in the business to actually working on the business.
Yeah, you can't go into that higher place mentally, emotionally, spiritually, creatively. You can't go into that higher place unless you know that the people who are most important to you are taken care of.
Yep.
Right? And if you are in a relationship with your spouse or significant other and they are the primary caretaker of the children, well then maybe that's already taken care of. But for a lot of us who have, entrepreneurial spouses,
Yep.
also, you have to put people in place who can give you that sense of peace of mind. Yep. So you can really go into those places. It amazes me how many lawyers will tell you, I'm doing this all for my children. I'm doing this all for my family. And then you ask them about their childcare. And it's like they're paying someone minimum wage to take care of the most important. I used to be friends with a guy. He was very, very successful at a very young age, had some kids, and retired. And he retired like in his 30s. And he was like a very intentional dad, right? Which I thought was fantastic. And he said to me, I was talking to him one time, and he said, I've got an appointment with my most important client that day, I'm not available. And I'm like, I thought you were retired. He's like, yeah, she's my most important client, his daughter,
yep.
Right? Who is your most important client if not your kids, right? So they assign the least qualified, lowest cost, dug them up out of some pile person and assigning them to their most important clients, most important case. That's insane. You should be paying your child care like the equivalent of at least a junior associate. That's going to blow the minds of a lot of lawyers. Like, oh, that's not possible. How is it not possible? If you do it, you'll find your business will start growing a lot because you raise your standards, you free yourself energetically and spirit. Anyway, you're nodding your head. You get what I'm saying?
I get it. I think that the other element there that is worth mentioning is, I think when I made that jump.
I think I just got a lot of people to unsubscribe to your podcast, by the way.
No, I think that it's a good point. I think the one thing that was the important thing for me that I did not necessarily take into effect was my marriage got better.
Everything gets better.
Well, because not only like it's nice having, you have the nanny there to help out, but we take her on vacations with us. So she loves it. But at the same time, we're on vacation, then I can go spend time with my wife when we're in a different environment to go do something fun, just the two of us, because that's one of the most expensive taxes in a business that you would ever have is getting divorced.
Look, this isn't a comment that's specific or unique to lawyers, but since this is the world we live in, we're going to talk in terms of owners of law firms, right? There are so many law firm owners who are broke and they're struggling and they can't figure out why they're broke and they're struggling and they're like, I'm doing everything I can, blah, 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 blah. And we say, well, you should invest in domestic services and buy yourself some freedom, right? And the first problem they have, of course, is what will other people think? So now basically what they're saying is they're living their life to appease other people, which is a whole other conversation of a different podcast that we did, I don't know when, or if not, then we will. We'll do another one. Yeah. Anyway, but even just doing the math, right? It's like, how many hours a day do you spend mopping the floor, scrubbing the toilet, doing the laundry, cleaning the house, and then like, well, I only do that, once a week. And I'm like, well, then your house is a pigsty. Well, how could you say that? You've never been to my house. Well, let's see. You've got 3 kids, 2 dogs, and a cat. Your housekeeper only comes once a month, and you only spend a couple of hours a week cleaning your house. How could it not be disgusting, right? That's the standards you're bringing to the rest of your work. That's the standards you're bringing to your cases. That's the standard you're bringing to your staff. And what's worse, that's the standard you're teaching to your most important clients, who are your children, right? Or then they say, well, I get to spend all kinds of time with my kids. What? They get to watch you scrub the toilet? They get to watch you mop the floor? They get to watch you go to the dry cleaner? I mean, they get to sit in the back of the car while you yell at them in traffic? That's not quantity of time and quality of time.
Very different things.
Well, but this goes back to scaling your business, right? Because we're really talking, everything we've been saying is scaling your business, right? Because people who think only in terms of quantity of time, they're the ones who have a hard time doing the math that we're talking about. People who understand that time has a quality to it. I mean, there's a reason why a lawyer who bills $500 an hour should be billing $500 an hour, whereas another lawyer who bills $1,000 an hour should be billing $1,000 an hour. And it's because the quality of the value of the time you get at $1,000 an hour, it's a higher quality, it's supposed to be a higher quality time where you get more done in less time, and ultimately the $1,000 an hour lawyer cost you less than the $500 an hour lawyer.
Yep. I think that shifting gears a little bit, once I got past what you would call level one and went to the level and put more of these things in place, it then became a matter of okay, now I can work on the business. What are the systems? What is the framework that I need to put in place for me, the team, to actually operate off of? How is communication handled? How is the chain of command or the org chart? What do these things look like? And we had a conversation briefly before this because it's something that you and I are both familiar with. The book that we followed initially was Traction by Gino Wickman, and following that EOS framework. I think there's a lot of benefits to it, but I think there's an element to it. I think I'd like to have you speak on the difference between traction and scaling up, the other sort of popular framework when it comes to entrepreneurial management and these sorts of things. Because I think there's positives and negatives to both, but I think also your stance on what are the things that if you've made that jump from level 1 to level 2 or level 3, whatever we want to say, what are those frameworks that an attorney could put in place inside of the practice to help with scaling, not growth?
Right. So I have nothing bad to say about EOS. I used EOS to help me with growing how to manage a small law firm. And then we graduated up to scaling up. I think that maybe in different industries this wouldn't be the benchmark, but for law firms, EOS is probably the right place to start until the business gets to around, by $5 million in gross revenue, you definitely will or should have outgrown EOS. And then it's time to kind of graduate up into scaling up. The big difference between, and keep in mind, Gino was a student of Vern. Vern Harnish is the author of Scaling Up. Gino Wickman is the author of EOS. And Gino was a student of Vern, and Gino used Scaling Up to build his business and then exit his business, and then he created EOS. And I think the easiest way to compare and contrast is to explain what scaling up is and what EOS is not or isn't. And again, I used EOS. EOS is great. If you want to get to $5 million, EOS is a great tool to use. Just know that when you get to 5, you're going to have to switch. Or you're going to be having to supplement it with so much different stuff that it's almost not worth it. So scaling up is based on 4 main pillars. The people, the systems and the processes, the financial controls, and he calls it cash flow, and the strategy. EOS is the people and the processes. Stop. It doesn't focus on financial controls and cash flow. It doesn't focus on strategy. So, when your revenues are $500,000, $1 million, $2 million, you don't need strategy. Your strategy is growth. That's your strategy. Your strategy is, I want to grow the top line gross revenue, and I want to find more efficiencies. That's your strategy. It's kind of like when you're inside a gun, the only place to go is that way to get out. You know what I'm saying? Once you get the business up to around $5 million, you get more options. The world of options opens up to you. And now you need to really work strategically to decide what direction you're going to go in, right? And when you get the revenues up to around $5 million in a law firm, at least, there's a lot of ways to run an unprofitable $5, $10, $20 million law firm.
You make $10 million a year, but you spend $10 million a year. Or more.
Yeah. No, but I mean, there's a lot of 8-figure law firms that are out there, and like they are bragging about gross revenues. Because I mean, look, all the awards are gross revenues, right? No one goes to cocktail parties and talks about total owner benefits or
what
net
the bottom
operating
line is.
Yeah, right. It's just not what people talk about,
No.
right?
A lot less sexy.
It's a lot more sexy.
Well, at cocktail parties in general.
It's a lot more sexy to talk about your net income when you're dealing with sophisticated entrepreneurs. So the most sophisticated entrepreneurs generally are talking net operating income.
Margin, all of it.
Gross, exactly. It's like gross revenue is training wheel talk. You get what I'm saying?
100%.
And it's easy. Look, it's fairly simple to grow a firm up to around $5 or $10 million in revenue. I mean, it's pretty simple to do. If you
Grow or scale?
Grow. It's fairly easy to grow. I use my words intentionally.
Okay.
A law firm in pretty much any practice area up to around $5 or $10 million in gross revenue. There's just, there's a ratio of dollars spent on marketing and advertising and sales, dollars spent on lawyers. You push enough money into marketing and sales, unless you're doing a really particularly bad job of it, you're going to see growth in top line gross revenues. The problem is you don't necessarily make a profit doing that, number one. And the second problem is you don't necessarily build a sustainable business that starts self-managing and growing itself after you stop giving it all that input.
Yep.
You get what I'm trying to say? To go back to the car analogy, imagine you're in whatever second gear of your car, and second gear, maybe you're cruising comfortably at 30 miles an hour, right? And you rev up the engine, and you slam the accelerator down to the floor, and the car like lurches forward from whatever I said, 30 miles an hour to 50 miles an hour. But what happens is the moment you take your foot off the accelerator, or it goes, it starts slowing down, right? That's what happens in a lot of these $5 and $10 million law firms that have been built to grow, but haven't been built to scale. What I'm looking for is a law firm. What I'm interested in doing, what I like to do, is to build a law firm that you can progress up through the gears, get to fifth gear, get to 80, 90 miles an hour, hit cruise control, and then just let it go and let it keep going. And then at the risk of changing analogies, I want the self-driving Tesla car law firm where I put the proper leadership team in place and I'm gone for 90 days at a time with emergency access only. And when you come back, you say, wow, while I was gone, revenues kept growing. While I was gone, the staff actually grew. While I was gone, the staff, and when I say grew, I don't just mean in headcount, but in skills and capabilities and performance and profitability. And while I was gone, the business became more profitable even than when I was here.
Yep.
That's a beautiful thing.
The very first time that I had that, typically, COVID was a different story, but typically we'd spend July in Europe every year, the whole month of July in Europe. And, I'd be early with the time change, get up, you're working, whatever else the difference would be. But then there was a shift where I started to make some of these changes that you're talking about. And it was basically exactly that, emergency access only. And it was like, I almost had a panic attack. Because it was like, this can't be real. Like, I'm waiting for the shoe to drop of like, what's the next thing that's going to what's going to happen? But exactly that, like, revenue went up, we onboarded new clients, new hires were made, and I come back and I'm like, I feel like I'm living in a dream world. It didn't even feel real, because you talk about it, you read about it, but it's one of those things where you actually, when you finally go through it, you're like, it's almost like you see the promised land. Like, like this actually works. And
you're describing my life.
Yeah.
And the lives of many law firm owners who you met at that last live quarterly meeting you attended, and it messes with your head.
It does.
Because next thing you know, it's a Wednesday afternoon, and you're sitting there, and your kids are in school, and you're like, what am I going to do? And my wife, speaking for me, she's an entrepreneur. She's very ambitious. She's launching new projects. And I'm like, hey, do you want to play? She's like, no, I'm working on something that I'm having fun with. Okay, well, my son's in school. My wife is doing her thing. And next thing you know, you go and make friends with someone like you, because I just don't have anyone else to talk to. I mean, but that's how it goes, right? Yeah. And that's another reason why a lot of small law firm owners don't do this, is because it requires such a shift in the way they live, right? Like, it's almost like I'm living a counterculture lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
Like,
bass backwards.
I go out on my boat on a Wednesday afternoon, and it's great because there's no one out there. You got the whole bay to yourself, right? You got the fishing hole to yourself. You got the dive spot to yourself. You got the gas dock to yourself. Unfortunately, you got to go out of your way to find people to share the experience with. Otherwise, you're all by yourself. And a lot of people are using their businesses to get love and get security and get self-esteem, and they're using their business to get some sort of identity from. And that's a big difference between growing a business and scaling a business.
Yeah.
You gotta really find an alternate identity that's decoupled from the business. That's hard for people to do.
It's hard, and there's, I think, a reason why.
It's hard for me to do.
I'm nowhere near your level, but it's hard for me by a long shot. I still struggle with it. But it's one of those things where, I've heard it so early on, and it just keeps getting repeated, that success is lonely. Because you reach a certain level of certain things, you're like, well, now what? But I think that, for me, it's not, I find myself less of like going out on a bike ride on a Wednesday afternoon, and more like along the lines of, what's the next thing that I could build, or what is the other thing that I could work on? Well, that's what
happens, right? That's exactly what happens. Is I gave the example with the boat. I mean, I live on a golf course. I have a massive collection of golf balls that have landed in my backyard because I live on the 9th hole of the golf course, right? I don't golf. I mean, I've played golf a couple of times, but I don't golf. I'm just not into it, right? No offense to the golfers, it's just not my thing.
Yep.
But it's like, how much can you golf? How much can you play tennis? How much can you go out on your boat? How much can you ride on your bike? How much can you play? Entrepreneurs are built to create things. We're built to create value. We're built to add value to the world. We're built to to be doing things productive, right? And so it just gets easier and easier and faster, and it becomes almost like a game to launch new businesses, right? Because when you're free from the day-to-day, and you have the financial resources behind you, and you've got the amazing team behind you, and you've got the confidence to try things because you've already failed and lost it all and know you can make it all back again if you have to. Hey, you know what? Let's try that. Let's try that. That goes back to my slush fund. The Arjan slush fund is like, let's try this, let's try that. Let's try a podcast with Daniel's Head Insurance Agency and see what happens.
Yep.
Right? Maybe something great, maybe not. Give it a try.
I think that there's an element of this that we can talk about, like my experiences are different than your experiences. But at the end of the day, I think we're saying a lot of the same things. I think one of the elements I want to bring attention to for a small law firm around scaling would be, what are the frameworks that you think are the most beneficial, whether that's the starting place, whatever that is, to achieve consistent scale, not a one-hit wonder year, but a consistent level of scaling in the practice. And I think you're credible about it because, the wall behind us is lined with plaques from Inc. 5000's fastest growing companies every year since 2015. So you're clearly an authority to talk on, running a very successful scaling company. What does that look like framework-wise for that small law firm?
So there's two ways to build an organization. One is with really tightly integrated controls and systems and processes. And the other is with more like looser controls and processes. The benefits of a real tightly aligned system, which is intuitively where most law firm owners go, is you can change things real fast, right? The whole organization can change directions. Things don't fall through the cracks. Everyone's singing from the same page in the hymn book. Everyone's in alignment. You never have to be apologizing to anyone because one person in the organization did it one way and another person in the organization did it another way. And so you never have that embarrassing moment where you got to make apologies.
Yeah.
Instructions come from the top down. This is the way the military works, right? The other approach is a much more loosely aligned policies and procedures where the president, me, you spend a lot more of your time talking about why we're doing what we're doing. We spend a lot more time talking about the standards that matter to us. We spend a lot more time talking about the criteria around things. And then you give people a lot more latitude to do things, and you wind up with a person over here who interpreted your why and your standards and your criteria this way, and this person over here who interpreted it that way, and sometimes they are compatible, and sometimes there's a misalignment because you might not have made yourself clear enough, and you got to go back and fix things. The benefit of that approach is you get a lot more innovation. You get the kind of people who want to come work for your organization who are independent thinkers. They tend to be much more, they tend to value culture a lot more, I think, in my experience. And if they're operating with the criteria and standards and and why we're doing things, you can leave them alone for months at a time. And as long as their decisions are all being made in that are consistent with the standards and the criteria and the why, I mean, so you would have chosen red, but they chose pink. Does it really matter? I mean, you wanted something from that family of color, right? If you wanted something that was fire engine red, then you shouldn't have said something from that family of color. You should have been more specific and said, this matters to me and I want it to be fire engine red. Otherwise, who gives a crap, right? But this is very difficult. You're nodding your head like this is the most obvious thing in the world, but I'm telling you, this is very difficult for lawyers in particular to wrap their head around. Why? Because lawsuits are filed over these mistakes that happen, right? One person in the trucking company was supposed to do it this way. Another person in the trucking company did it that way. The documented policy or the statute or whatever specified another way. And that gap between the different understandings is where the lawyer goes to try to find liability and prove negligence or whatever in a lawsuit. And so, so it's very difficult for lawyers to understand that that's really the better way to scale up a business. It's the more practical way to scale up a business. It's the more profitable way to scale up a business. And ultimately, it's in long term, the more sustainable way to scale up a business. Why? Because when you've got this command control structure where everything is locked in so tight, sooner or later, the person who's in command is going to have a bad day. And when that happens, everyone follows orders and marches straight off the cliff.
Not a good place. I think that one of the elements that there was a tough thing for me growing the companies was my leadership and my leadership style had to change. This may not be true for everyone, but it was different for me leading a team of 1 or leading a team of 2 than it was leading a team of 20, because the communication is different. We have COVID, so the manner in which you're communicating in person versus virtual had to change and adapt.
Been there, done that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that
doing it now still.
I think it's a we're all a work in progress with it. But I think one of the elements I'd like to hear your opinion on would be, as a small law firm owner, who do they have to be today as the leader? And then who do they, like we talked about, 5 years from now, right. What do you look like 5 years from now? Who does that person look like? Obviously, there's going to be variations to it, but where should they be targeting today? And what type of leader should they be looking to be in 5 years if they want to continue scaling?
That's a great question. And I'm going to answer a different question, though.
Sure.
I'll try to answer the question you asked me.
In a roundabout way?
I'm going to try to answer the question you asked me, but I think it's more important to answer a question you didn't ask me first. Because the question you asked me is a great question, but it's what I would call a kind of a theoretical, intellectual question. The more practical question that I know that every small law firm owner watching this either has experienced, is experiencing, or will experience is the dynamic where you discover that the people who got you here aren't necessarily the same people who are going to get you there, right?
Yep.
And the reason I'm not addressing the question you asked me is because too often law firm owners think that they can control this dynamic by growing, by learning, by changing, by doing things differently themselves. And it's important to accept that you can't. It's just how it is. the people who get you here aren't necessarily, and most likely won't be, the people who get you there. It's very rare to have the same group of people with you from $0 in revenue all the way up to $1 million in revenue. Rarer still to have the same group who are with you from $0 in revenue to $5 million in revenue, precisely because of the dynamic that we're talking about here. And let me be more specific. From 0 to about $1 million in revenue, let's just start off with 0 to 250,000, 0 to 500,000 in revenue for most small law firms. It's you and a little band of brothers and sisters and brethren people, right? We're all in the same foxhole together. You know what I'm saying? And you're having breakfasts together, and you're having lunches together, and you're having dinners together, and maybe you're even taking vacations together. And they really get to know you as a human being.
Yep, been there.
And they see your weaknesses, they see your strength, they see your humanity, they see your humor, they see you at your best, they see you at your worst, and they understand your jokes. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Now the business gets to $1.5 million. You bring in that professional legal administrator we were talking about before. That professional legal administrator starts hiring people who you don't even know, which is good. This is a good thing. You want this to happen. Well, now these people don't know you. They know the professional legal administrator, right? And they don't know you as a human being. They just know you as the boss. And now the professional legal administrator helps you scale the business, and now it's at $3 million, $5 million in revenue, right? And now the professional legal administrator has department heads who have hired people who the professional legal administrator hasn't met, and those people certainly haven't met you. And now you walk into your office, or you have a firm retreat or whatever, and there's people who you don't know, where did so-and-so go? Looking around for so-and-so. I wanted to congratulate her on whatever. Oh, she left. Why didn't I know about that? Oh, we sent around an announcement. We had a going away party. You were in Europe for a month when it happened. Your assistant sent her a gift. She wrote you back a thank you note. It's in the pot. Oh my God, I feel terrible, right? Well, but you shouldn't feel terrible. This is just how it is, right? And where are all these people? Who are these people? Well, this is, let's say, Paula, the professional legal administrator, who hired Dan, the director, who hired Sandra, the subordinate. You didn't meet Sandra, the subordinate. You barely even know Dan, the director, right? And you start to become more of a figurehead, more of a legend, like the legend of Dre, right? And people start saying things about you that they heard from other people who didn't know you either. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I can give a few very specific
I'd love to hear them.
examples. Okay. Here's one example that doesn't involve me. I'll give you two examples that don't involve me and one that does. Mark McCormick wrote a book called What They Don't Teach You in Harvard Business School, which is a phenomenal book and everyone should read it. One day, Mark McCormick was in the mood for a banana. He just had a taste for a banana and he asked someone, hey, can you get me a banana? Next thing you know, Mark's got bunches of bananas waiting for him when he checks into hotel rooms. He's getting banana gifts from people at Christmas because Mark's wild about bananas. In the book, he says, I just wanted a banana. I like them sometimes. It's like, had a taste for a banana, you know.
That day. Not
That day.
ongoing.
Right.
Yeah.
Second story. The COO of our business used to be the COO for the business of T. Harv Eker. And at the time, they had like 200 or something employees. You like chocolate?
Yeah.
You like chocolate? Yep. You like chocolate? Everyone here likes chocolate? All right. For some reason, Harv hates chocolate. Just hates it. And so there was a rule that you couldn't have chocolate on the menu at any events that Harv was running. And he hated it so much that he didn't even want chocolate in the room because the smell of it just disgusted him. I mean, there are people who have, strong olfactory senses.
Sure.
Right? So you couldn't even have chocolate in the room. You could have a 500-person event. You could have 1,000 people in the event. He would run events with thousands of people, and no one was allowed to have chocolate because Harv can't stand the smell of chocolate. Right?
Yep.
You want to hear the funny thing? Harv likes chocolate. He doesn't dislike chocolate at all. And I got this directly from the former CEO of the business, that he was there at the meeting where there was a woman in attendance of a small meeting with a small group of people, like 5 or 6 people in her little room, and she happened to have a severe chocolate allergy. And Harv said, out of courtesy to her, let's not have any chocolate on the menu or in the room because she has a severe chocolate allergy. Next thing you know, Harv hates chocolate. You can't have chocolate in a room with thousands of people because
It's like a game of telephone.
and people literally start making up this. I mean, I just made up a big long story of bullshit about he has highly sensitive olfactory senses and blah 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 blah. People make shit up to protect and defend the rumors that they hear.
Yeah.
Right? All right. Personal. We host about 50 live events per year. How to manage a small law firm. We've got like a 5 or 6 person full-time events team, and we host about 50 live events per year. My team runs all kinds of workshops on everything. You've been to some of them. Me, myself, personally, you give me the choice to stay in a Marriott or a Hilton, I would prefer a Marriott. I just would prefer a Marriott.
Same.
Some people like Marriott, some people like Hilton, some people prefer Ford, some people prefer Chevrolet, some people prefer BMW, some people prefer Mercedes, whatever. I just personally, all things being equal, would prefer a Marriott. We just hired a new events director. He came from the events world. And we were debriefing. And I'm letting him get to know me, and I'm getting to know him. And we're going through a list of venues that he's picking. And he made some comment about how he sure would love to be able to do it at this Hilton in this city because it would be better financially, whatever, it would be better. But, I know we can't do that because, you got your thing with Hiltons and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, whoa. What's that again? Say that again? What? He's like, yeah, I know, you don't like Hiltons. I'm like, I don't hate Hiltons. I don't even dislike Hiltons. I simply prefer Marriott. I do. Another example. If anything, I am guilty of letting people get away with too much shit. This is part of the reason I have to surround myself with real professional managers, because I let people get away with it. I give everyone the benefit of the doubt. It's just how I am.
Yeah.
There has never, not once, ever been a single time in the history of this entire company where anyone has ever been fired just because they chewed their salad the wrong way, right? I mean, if anything, like, we give them too many chances. We give them too many tries. We give them too much coaching. We give them too much opportunities. We bend over backwards, right? And yet, there was a rumor, a urban legend, which took us about 2 years to mostly quash out. And I always worry that it's still there brewing, right? That you could just get fired. And for 2 years, I basically had to do a campaign. And this was a campaign. I had to do a campaign that if anyone knows anyone who got fired without lots and lots and lots of tries to save them, or if you think someone might have been, or if you're worried that someone could have been, please privately contact me. I give my email address, the whole thing. We'll ask you to sign a non-disclosure agreement, and I will open up the employment file for you so you can see for yourself it has never happened. Because it never happened. It took 2 years to kill this because someone who didn't know me probably heard me make a joke, or maybe they saw me on a bad day, and there's so many levels removed from me in their day-to-day operations that they just caught me on a bad day, and next thing you know, are you understand where I'm going with this?
I do, yep.
And so you asked me about how the owner of a small law firm needs to grow and evolve and change as a leader. And yes, there's a lot you can do to grow and evolve and change as a leader, and you should. But you got to understand that it's more about just accepting that the people who get you when you're little, not everyone's going to get you. And really what you need to do is protect them from you and protect you from them. You got to just, and this is part of the maturity of I'm not trying to get my friends from my business. I'm not trying to get my appreciation from my staff. I'm not trying to get my self-esteem from the people who work for me. I'm content to just let them be employees, and I'm content to let them just be the staff, and I don't have an emotional need for them to be on my team.
I think that this is a thing that I struggled with. Like, the people who helped me get to 7 figures the first time were not the same people that could go, like, take it to the next level.
Nor do they necessarily want to, and that's the part that a lot of people
100%
forget.
It's but I wish that I had known about that landmine earlier on, because it caused sleepless nights and emotion, like all of the sort of roller coaster that we go on.
For you and for them.
Yep.
Right, because they're sitting there thinking, man, you know what? The time has come for me to bid adieu to Dre and wish him well, and I'm so happy that I was able to get you to $1 million in revenue. Now I'm going to go find someone else who's at $200,000 in revenue and get them to $1 million, and then I'm going to go find someone else who's at a. It's like it's like the kindergarten teacher has to celebrate when the kid graduates to grade school, and the high school teacher or the junior high school teacher has to graduate when the kid graduates and goes to high school, and the high school teacher to college. You can't say, oh my God, you were my teacher when I was 2 years old and I was learning my ABCs and still wearing a diaper to school. Oh my God, how am I going to break it to her that she can't also be my teacher for 12th grade geometry?
Yeah. It's a good metaphor for it, but I think it's one of those elements when it came to scaling and growing, that what got you here will not get you there. And that's people, processes, systems. A variety of things I think have to be continually innovated and improved upon. And I think the hardest element is the people element.
The hardest part is the people element. Hugh McLeod, an artist,
Yep.
He's got a really funny cartoon that says, rocket science, that's easy. We deal with people.
Yeah, very accurate.
It's the hardest part of building the law firm is the people. It's also
the most rewarding.
I was about to say it's the most rewarding if you'll let go.
Yeah.
If you'll let go and loosen your grip a little bit and just focus on the why and the standards and the criteria and empower your people with a clear vision and a good strategy and good financial controls that they can use to know whether they're, where they are in their performance and good key performance indicators and metrics. It's so amazing to watch people grow.
Yeah. Anything else scaling wise that you think we should touch on other than the fact that you've got a book coming out later this year around scaling with Vern Harnish himself? Anything else that you want to sort of wrap
Yeah,
up
I was
with?
actually going to say that because I didn't want anyone to think that I was trying to hide the fact because we're talking about scaling
Yeah.
up. So Vern, so the Scaling Up organization asked me to help them build something for law firms, $25 to $100 million in revenue and $10 to $25 million in revenue. And because I have experience doing that from a past life. And I said, okay, but you have to also let me build something for firms $1 to $10 million in revenue. And they said yes. So we've got how to scale up your law firm that should be out at the end of 2023.
Hopefully you enjoyed another edition of us covering some really awesome and incredible topics when it comes to taking your law firm to the next level and this scaling up conversation in particular. So we'll see you next time around.